Welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Living for Today podcast, where we will discuss the boundaries between reality and spirituality. I'll be your host, Ryan Kurczak. In today's maiden episode, we will discuss what it means to live for today, the purpose of this podcast, and reveal the content and characters in future episodes. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome everyone to this brand new podcast, Living for Today. My name's Ryan Kurczak, and many of you know me and many of you don't. Many of you know a little bit about me. This is going to be a bit of a personal podcast, while also trying to touch upon global issues that help us as individuals and our society function a little better, function a little healthier, and possibly bring that whole idea of an enlightened world or enlightened culture a little closer to reality. Now, it is currently 8:59 a.m. on May 1st, 2019. This is one of my favorite holidays, May Day. So it seemed like a good enough time to begin this podcast. There's so much to tell you, so much I want to get into, and that will have to come over the course of all these episodes that we have planned, and I've already got many of them scheduled and actually quite a few done just in the post-production stage. But let me start by discussing where the inspiration of this podcast came from. And this will tap into many of my previous life experiences up until this point. For many years, I've wanted to do a podcast, but despite reading Podcasting for Dummies and all these other things, it seemed kind of a royal pain. So I spent most of my time focusing on YouTube videos. I have two YouTube channels, one dedicated to Kriya yoga meditation, the other dedicated to the Vedic Indian science of astrology called Jyotish. That was very easy. You just make a video, post it, and people find it. But podcasting seemed kind of difficult with having to submit it to different sites and so on, so I never got around to it. However, as life goes, it's become much easier these days. But what brings us to this specific podcast, this specific effort? Well, this is going to take a little bit of a backstory. For most of my life, I've been interested in philosophy, psychology, healing, health, from what I considered a place of trying to encourage others to live well, I went to college for psychology and philosophy. Those were what my degrees were in, with the idea that if I could just understand a person's psychology, or even my own psychology, or if I could just find that philosophy that would allow us to live well, that pain would be minimized, life would tend to be better. And so that's what my initial impulse was towards studying philosophy and psychology. But as I progressed through my studies, I came to realize that there was a wall that it seemed that most psychologists and even most philosophers came to. They couldn't take it all the way. And it was at that time I was made aware of a book called Autobiography of a Yogi, and my girlfriend, later wife at the time, Melissa, she began taking alternative health and healing classes. And so I was introduced to other ways of seeing the world. And this was all in the little town of Fairmont, West Virginia. So it was surprising. This was all happening in the very late 90s. And from that point, after I read Autobiography of a Yogi, it became a little more clear to me that possibly meditation, possibly yoga practice could pick up where psychology and philosophy left. So I began exploring this idea of meditation and yoga And we have to remember that yoga is not necessarily just simply the postures that you see people doing. And many people know this today, but for those who don't really pay much attention to yoga, it's not just about the postures. In a way, it's a path of living to allow a person to be more holistic, to understand how their diet affects their mind, how the entertainment that they feed their senses affects how they relate to the world, how we treat everyone, how that impacts our sense of happiness. So yoga is not just simply about postures or breathing exercises or meditation. It's actually a whole way of living such that us as individuals and as a society and beyond can try to be good to each other, can try to experience greater ease in life. And of course, when I was younger, I thought that meant it would eradicate all suffering, which as the years go on, you learn that's not true. But it does allow a person to have more poise when things occur that cannot be prevented. But again, in the Yoga Sutras, there's the idea that pain, which has not yet been experienced, is to be avoided. And the whole purpose of that sutra or that statement is simply to say, try to find ways to live such that you're not causing more problems for yourself, because you'll have enough to deal with in the long run. But anyway, back to the story. So we became interested in meditation. Melissa was an overachiever, interested in NASA and science, and eventually she began to see that working too hard and exhausting oneself isn't really worth it. So she switched her career vocation to that of becoming a massage therapist, which in turn led me to explore other forms of alternative healing. And then in time, I also went back to massage therapy school, began specializing in craniosacral therapy, studied all the energetic techniques, studied Ayurvedic medicine, which again is the natural healthcare system of India, became more interested in meditation, committed to a daily, consistent, intensive meditation practice. And this was all in my early 20s. And from there, this proceeded for a number of years until eventually, around 2006, 2007, Melissa, having another impulse towards change, decided she wanted to impact the world in a greater way. And so she went back to school to WVU to get her master's in public health, because she enjoyed working with people, doing massage, helping individuals heal, but she wanted to impact the world in a greater fashion. So she did this, and all the while I continued to study the alternative means of healing. I became an authorized Kriya Yoga meditation teacher in that time, so I began doing some minor traveling to do workshops and seminars on meditation. I became much more involved in the yoga community. And then we had decided to move to Asheville, North Carolina, which was, and probably still is, a hotbed for alternative spirituality and wellness. There we spent 10 years. At one point in time, I had been in charge of a meditation center, a Kriya Yoga meditation center. I had eventually given up doing body work, such as massage and craniosacral therapy and energetic healing, to focus on teaching meditation, but also to begin practicing full-time Vedic astrology, which is a form of counseling that people can benefit from. I developed a fantastic body of knowledge in books and on YouTube, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. And I don't mean to toot my own horn with the fantastic body of knowledge, but I am proud of that body of work and how thorough I feel that it is. I began developing the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online, focusing on meditation. So this was all happening in Asheville, and life was progressing in the way that we had always intended. We were living as best we could. We were trying to be as conscientious and conscious as possible. We were dedicated to our spiritual path. We were dedicated to our work. And then one day, Melissa got sick. We had no idea what the issue was. She just had a swollen lymph node that wouldn't go away. And we tried alternative healing of all different kinds, from Ayurveda to acupuncture to energy healing to chiropractic. And we figured, well, we've lived a good life. We've been vegetarian most of that life. We've exercised. We've rested and rejuvenated when we needed it. We took care of ourselves and each other, and we were good to each other. Surely this isn't going to be anything serious. It's going to be something that just passes. But as it turned out, that ended up being probably one of the most aggressive forms of leukemia that an adult could get. And so we spent about a year and a half doing some quite intensive procedures, medical procedures. And this was quite a shock, considering that we had been primarily focused on natural health and well-being. We rarely ever went to the doctor, if at all. And we assumed that due to our lifestyle choices that our genes would cooperate with us, and that we would be able to have a long, healthy life. Although Melissa was more interested in that than I was. She was fascinated with the idea of blue zones and living to be 100 and all these sorts of things. But due to my temperament, which had the capacity to be depressed and bitter and morose at times, I wasn't so enamored with life, so I would do my best, but if death came sooner than later, it wouldn't be a problem. So it was quite a shock to see that she was the one that got this diagnosis, and I was not the one that got the diagnosis. But anyway, we spent about a year and a half, and maybe at another time I'll go into more detail with this, because that in and of itself was a profound learning experience for both of us. Could not have asked for something more powerful in regards to spiritual transformation, again, for both of us. But again, that might have to be a topic for another time. And I'm sure it'll come up in future podcasts, as I do have scheduled at least one colleague where we discuss the ideas of healing through dying, healing through death, and the power of death, and how we can look at it in a way that is actually healthy and uplifting and supportive, put it into perspective such that it doesn't destroy us. And that was one of the things that Melissa came to and learned as this illness eventually unbodied her, as C.S. Lewis might say, was that she was completely healed, but not healed in body, but completely healed. And again, that will have to be another time, a topic for another time. But anyway, back to the point of this general introduction. So after that year and a half of thinking she was getting well and actually overcoming this illness, and then it all come crashing down and her eventual passing, that led to quite, and still is quite a experience of self-reflection and diving deep into what is important. And one of the things that stuck with me that Melissa learned, it's actually lesson 9, or was it lesson? Let's see here. Lesson 9 in her book. She wrote a little book during the last 7 weeks of her life, and she has these 10 lessons of things that she learned. And lesson 9 is be in the moment, not distracted into the future. And as she wrote in this book, as I type this, I don't know if I have hours or days or weeks left. What I do know is that I have now. That is all we have. And often we spend every second of every day distracting ourselves into the future. The future is an illusion. So focusing our awareness in this moment is all we can do. Now again, maybe you understand that, maybe you don't. If you've never taken care of someone that you care deeply about as they passed, you might not be able to relate to this, or at least in the way that she was intending. But that is the point of this podcast, is to help us find this, help us to come to an understanding of this without having to be at death's door. So that way we can really, truly live our life, be in the moments of our lives with no regrets. And that is one thing that still, in a way, baffles me about the experience with Melissa's passing, because again, we had been together since I was 16. I did not know an adult life without her, and still it seems inconceivable at times. But even as she went through the worst of these treatments, and even as she was told nothing else could be done, she repeated over and over again that she would not take back a minute. She would not take back a minute. And again, that ties into the idea that she had of being actually truly completely healed. Anyway, if you want to explore more of what she came to towards the end of her life, the little book that she wrote is called 10 Life Lessons to Free the Soul, A Cancer Journey and My Life Story. And it is available on Amazon. So you can explore that, and we'll talk more about it later. So all of this occurred all before my 40th birthday. In fact, I'm not quite there yet. But what was fascinating about all this is a few years before she got sick, a friend of mine, another colleague, had recommended that I do a floatation tank, a sensory deprivation floatation tank. And in Asheville, these things are available. So for my birthday, Melissa had gotten me a gift certificate to one of these things, and she actually enjoyed it quite a bit. But I went and I did this sensory deprivation tank, and it really wasn't much of anything for me. I just felt like I was floating in darkness. Why that's the case, who knows? Maybe I can't quite appreciate it, as the owner of the business told me. But my experience was that since I had been meditating for about 16 years at that point in time, that state of withdrawing my attention I can do in meditation. So I didn't necessarily need the sensory deprivation tank for that. Also, floating in water, I would have preferred just taking a hot bath or being in a hot tub. And for the price of it, I thought it was a little bit ridiculous. But anyway, I'm sure many other people get benefits from it. I didn't, except for halfway through as I was laying there, just completely in a blank. These words came into my mind. They said, "You are going to die." Sat there, or laid there for a moment and reflected upon that and thought, well, gee, that wasn't my voice. What's that all about? And that was the extent of it. And after about an hour of laying in the flotation tank, I'd sort of let that go. And I had an hour and a half to go. But I decided, you know what? This is sort of, I've had enough. I can keep laying here in the water for another half hour, or I can get up and go about my day and get something done, because I've already meditated today. So I just got up and I found the owner, and I told him, so that was nice, but not much of anything. So I think I'm just going to head out. And he said, well, maybe you just didn't get in the zone. Did you really let yourself go? And he was trying to make all these things about how I was missing the point of the flotation tank. And I thanked him and said, no, it's all right, fine. I'm sure it's wonderful for many other people. And I left. And I don't know if that was just something odd in my head that popped up. But when I was younger, I did have this weird idea, like in my teens, that I wouldn't make it to 40, that I wouldn't live that long. I don't know why. It was just a sense I had. And one of the things, I'm still not 40 yet, so who knows? There's still time. And if you knew about the stuff I had been through in the last 10 months after even Melissa passed, you'd think, well, it might be possible for him to check out. But I realized, and Melissa and I talked about this a lot, that when she was passing, that I was also passing. That person who thought he was Ryan, whose life was so about being with Melissa, that was passing. And I made a joke to a friend after she passed that now I have to enter the world of mortals. Because when I think about it, before that time, before she got sick, there was really not much that I would have truly needed to complain about. And now there's nothing I would complain about related to my life before that. But now being in a world where that person no longer exists physically, as mentioned, she had been unbodied. And about a month ago, my mentor, my spiritual teacher, Roy Davis, who's a Kriya yoga teacher whom I met about 20 years ago, who was a very important part of both my life and Melissa's life, also passed. He was one of the final anchors to this idea of what I would consider the old Ryan to be. All this led to the creation of this podcast. I had been in Asheville teaching meditation, participating in this way. And I left Asheville and I came back to West Virginia. And one of the people we're going to have on this podcast, Jim Norton, he had been a friend of mine for a number of years since I graduated college. He married Melissa and I. He also did her memorial. He had started, or he and another individual who's also on this podcast, episode 4, Jim Norton's episode 2, Jim Nolan's episode 4. They had started a meditation group, a fantastic meditation group of wonderful people. And I was so amazed to show back up in West Virginia, where probably the idea of a vegetarian is as rare as water in a desert to many people. And meditation is slowly starting to catch on, and yoga is catching on more here as well. But to find a meditation group that made me go, wow, this is really a fantastic place to be. They do the meditation, but they also review books. And they were reviewing a book by the writer Ken Wilber. And I don't know too much about Ken Wilber. Someone had mentioned him to me after Melissa had passed, because he had also been deeply in love with someone. And then not too long after they got married, she developed cancer. And I believe that the book that she wrote was called Of Grace and Grit or something like that. I only read a little bit of it. That's all I knew about him. But they were beginning to read this book called No Boundaries, I believe. And I was just listening to the conversation and participating in the meditations. But not too long ago, they came to page 79 in that book. And as I read it, numerous things came together for me. Number one, I'd for some reason been thinking about a podcast. And we'll get more into the reasons why soon. I've been trying to figure out, what is it that needs to be shared, because I have this YouTube channel going over meditation and Kriya yoga, and I've got numerous books, and I've sort of come to a point right now where it seems like, well, what else can you really say about it? It's not that complicated. And anyway, in this meditation group, this passage from Ken Wilber's book stuck out to me, and I'll read it to you. Because we demand a future, we live each moment in expectation and unfulfillment. We live each moment in passing. In just this way, the real, timeless present is reduced to the fleeting present, the passing present of a mere 1 or 2 seconds. We expect each moment to pass onto a future moment, for in this fashion we pretend to avoid death by always rushing toward an imagined future. We want to meet ourselves in the future. We don't want just now. We want another now, and another, and another, tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. And thus, paradoxically, our impoverished present is fleeting precisely because we demand that it end. We want it to end, so that it can thereby pass on to yet another moment, a future moment, which will in turn live only to pass. So I read this, and I remembered what Melissa wrote in her book, lesson number 9, about be present because the future is an illusion. And after this came about, not more than a few days, I was thinking about the idea of a podcast, and I discovered that, it's actually easy to do podcasts these days. I don't have to mess around with all the technical stuff. Many sites actually just do it for you. But I was in a coffee shop, and the song Imagine came on. John Lennon's Imagine came on. And I was a huge Beatles fan in high school, and I very much liked John Lennon's later work. And Imagine, the line that was being sung right as I paid attention was, imagine all the people living for today. imagine all the people living for today. And in a way, it all came together because I started thinking about Melissa's work in public health, and she was very focused on what's called the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences, and how that impacts a society, how it impacts an individual. We're actually going to have some episodes on this, so stay tuned for that. And I never quite understood why she was so focused outwardly, socially in that regard. But it started to become clear that we are all in this together, and that when we're trapped in the past, whether it be due to adverse childhood experiences which we don't understand or haven't developed resiliency from, or traumas such as watching one's wife pass before your eyes, trying to make peace with that. All these things came together, and then even in my teaching, because I teach Kriya yoga, I have